Let's get this thing started. Hey everybody, I'm Professor Khalil Amani. This is Khalil Amani's World 100. I'm rocking these are my new shades. I got these when I was in Orlando, don't you? Aren't those a fly ass? What they call these things? Quay. This particular stunner shade is called Quay. What a beautiful pair of shades, huh? They're different from my other ones. Where are they at? My other ones. Which these still are like my favorites. These still are some dope shades, but I'm rocking some new ones. Fashion mixed in with scholarship. Alright, this is part 3, y'all. We're talking about the differences and the conflict. The conflict between the Jerusalem church and the Pauline church. If this is your first one on this series, there's two other parts you might want to check out and then come to this one. But here we are on part 3. Yeah, we are discussing the rift, the gulf, the bridge, the wall between what the original followers of Jesus were doing in Jerusalem versus what Paul would come up with later on. Now, old struggle doctrine, old Israel doctrine, he's over there. I like this. See, it's all about teaching. Forget this ideal of getting on camera, face to face, and arguing back and forth. You get 5 minutes, you get 5 minutes. No, just go on your channel and teach your shit, my nigga. This is what it's about. I mean, I know I can tell it's hard for Israel doctrine to just teach about the subject without taking, personal shots, ad hominems, name calling. You gotta, he's butthurt. But this is what it's about. I'm not with that debate shit. Get on your channel and get to kicking the ballistics. You have all the time in the world. You're undisturbed. And you can do part by part by part. That's what I'm into. I'm not into tongue wrestling and lip wrestling with a nigga over a 7 to 15 minute period. And I gotta shut up so he can talk his shit. Talk your shit on your channel as I talk my shit on my channel. Facts. But he's over there and it's clear that he needs help. He got Hananiah reading for him. He got that trout mouth woman over there making videos against me about this whole religious stuff. You don't see my people. And I got more people than they got. But you don't see Sister Leak You and others out here windmilling for me and talking they shit and trying to get into this religious conversation. They know I got it fine. I got it handled. I don't need no reader. I don't need no peanut gallery like Trout Mouth. I'm just over here doing the damn thing. Doing the damn thing. See, the mistake and the fault that people like Israel Doctrine are making in this discussion, I'm glad he's on the discussion, is that he's trying to use Paul's words to say there was no rift. They say there was no beef. You can't use Paul's words. And then he calls modern and mainstream scholars liars. You can never trust a nigga on YouTube that calls people who have PhD degrees in religion and New Testament studies and archaeology and biblical studies. You can never trust a person like that who calls them liars. Not to mention, anybody who's teaching Bible and they have a religion in front of their name or in back of their name, you can't trust them either. You can trust someone like me. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Hebrew. I'm not an Israelite. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I don't have a dog in the fight. Let the chips fall where they may. But when you are a Hebrew Israelite, a Christian, or an Israelite, you got a position to uphold. You got to carry the party line that the Apostle Paul was in step with Jesus. See, that's part of it. Most Hebrew Israelites and most Israelites, they believe in Jesus. That's just what it is. And since they believe in Jesus, they further believe in Paul. Very few Israelites don't believe in Paul. The only Israelites that I know for a fact don't fuck with Paul are like that brother in Japan, what's his name? Judah Nazareth. I forgot what he calls his group, but they are, Toranites. The Toranites are an Israelite group, and they got it right. I'm talking about brother Judah Nazareth. He got it right. They understand that Paul wasn't shit, and that Paul went away from the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Torah. Shout out to Judah Nazareth for having that understanding as an Israelite. But outside of Judah Naz and his Toranites movement, most of these guys like Struggle Doctrine, they ain't nothing but Christians of a little bit more learned order. That's all. They Christians at their core. They know a little bit more than the average Christian because they are invested in trying to understand it. But when it comes to Paul, they must fall back on their Christian upbringing and weave Paul seamlessly into the Jesus narrative. Oh yeah. That's what they must do. That's what they must do. They got to weave Paul in. They got to make Paul a part of the original shit that was going down when Jesus leaves the earth. Now I want to start out with the reading from a book. I want to read from this book called The Hidden Scrolls. It's by California State University professor Robert Eisenman. Now Robert Eisenman has been featured on many TV shows, on the Learning Channel, on the A&E, on many of the channels that talk religion. Robert Eisenman is one of the few New Testament scholars and Gnostic scholars who don't fuck with Paul. Robert Eisenman is actually a Christian who looks at Paul as a lying, rat, bastard liar. And so I want to start out by reading just what he says about Paul. This is what Struggle Doctrine can't do. I want to read to you what he says about Paul. I said the book is called The Hidden Scrolls. It's about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's by Neil Asher Silverman. Excuse me, he's not a Christian, he's Jewish. Let's see, let's look at his, the book is by Silverman. Excuse me, the book is by Silverman, who is going to quote Eisenman. Okay, all right, I had to get that straight. I got to get that straight. All right, let's see. Okay, so I want to read something from this book. I got to get my facts right, Get my facts right. So when we go over here, I want to read. This is a California State professor. His name is Robert Eisenman or Eisenman. That's where we started at. He says, let me see if I can find something about Eisenman in this book before I let you read that. Let's see real quick. Well, I don't see where his name is actually introduced, but that's okay. Eisenman. 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 Well, his name is up there too, but I wanna start. I wanna see if I can find his name. There he goes. Professor Robert Eisenman of California State University at Long Beach. Got it? This is a mainstream scholar that bees on TV. His name is Professor, that means he has a PhD, Robert Eisenman of the California State University at Long Beach. Let's just see what he says. Let's just see what he says. He's got something to say. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. We'll just start right here. Since the beginning of Dead Sea Scrolls studies, scholars have been fascinated with the question of the identity of three vivid personalities repeatedly mentioned in the Qumran texts. Number one, the teacher of righteousness, the wicked priest, and the scoffer or man of lies. While the vast majority of scholars, as I have said, place these historical figures somewhere in the Hasmonean period, Dr. Robert Eisenman, Professor Dr. Robert Eisenman of California State University, sees them as the personifications and the leaders of factions that were in a bitter three-way battle for the hearts and minds of the Judean population in this period. The Messianic movement, the traditional high priesthood, and the Hellenized aristocracy. Professor Eisenman believes, here it goes, that Paul, the Apostle Paul, is the man of lies. Goddamn. Mentioned with such disdain in the commentary of Habakkuk, who together with the unfaithful of the new covenant have not believed in the covenant of God and have profaned his holy name. Goddamn. Goddamn. Just showing you some stuff. Just some stuff. Some more of what Eisenman says. Eisenman expressed it more directly to me when we talked about the passage in the book of Acts where the former Saul of Tarsus was dispatched by the Herodian appointed high priest to Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, any of the people that old struggle doctrine is calling Christians, these Israelites who were called the way, not Christians, men or women, Saul would bring them bound to Jerusalem. The way, of course, was a frequent used term in the Qumran literature to describe the community. What community? The Jerusalem community, the Jerusalem church. Yeah. Just a few things. You out of here? Wow.
Showing you how I'm getting back to normal.
It is. I see. Great job. Keep it up.
I'll let you know when I leave.
All right. Okay. One more little reading here. Thus, Professor Eisenman has come to believe that Christianity was born as a conscious, intentional, ideological inversion of radical Jewish Messianism that occurred only after the death of Jesus, while the Jerusalem community the Jerusalem church, James, Paul, Peter, and all of them, while the Jerusalem community apparently continued to insist on full observance of Jewish ritual and custom, Paul, the Apostle Paul, began to lay down the foundations of an entirely different faith. In it, salvation was to be granted not by hating one's oppressors, but by loving them. Not by observing the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. With the revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, the original Jewish Messianic movement, that's the Jerusalem church, that's the original followers of Jesus. See, the original Israelite, Hebrew, or Jewish Messianic movement or church was gradually wiped out. Wiped out. Wiped the fuck out. But Paul's heretical variation continued to spread and gain adherents among the Gentile Christian communities all over the Greco-Roman world. Okay, what a great place to start our discussion. All the scholars are saying what I'm saying. All the scholars are saying, we read in this book, goddamn, that the original Israelites, the original Jews, the original Hebrews, the original Jesus community in Jerusalem, it was gradually wiped out. But Paul was a heretic. Paul's heretical variation, it continued to spread and gain adherents and followers and proselytes among the Gentile Christian communities all over the Greco-Roman world. When you got scholarship on your side, Israel doctrine struggle, you can have readers and windmillers and all kind of people, but they're not going to undo what scholarship says. Even this book by Silberman, even he mentions that the followers of Jesus were called the Way and not Christians. Now let's get to it. And so Jesus dies and goes about his business. He goes about his business. He leaves the disciples. The original Jerusalem church and the 12, there were 12 because even though Judas was one of the 12 who went and hanged himself or fell down a hill, they replaced him with a dude named Matthias. And so the original followers of Jesus, James and Peter and John and Andrew and Philip and Thomas and Bartholomew and Matthew and James, the brother of Alphaeus. And lastly, no, I'm missing somebody, Matthias, who replaces Judas Iscariot. Oh, and Simon the Zealot, and let me see, James, these are 12 disciples, James, Peter, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas, the brother of James, and the 12th disciple that was voted, his name was Matthias. Matthias. Matthias replaces Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. And then there was the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mom. She was part of the movement. There was Martha, the auntie. There was Mary Magdalene, some scholars say was the wife of Jesus, and many others. But the 12 disciples, they were there to carry on the mission of Jesus. The 12 disciples, James, Peter, John and Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, the brother of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas, the brother of James, and Matthias. They were the original 12 that were commissioned to carry on the life work of Jesus of Nazareth. And straightway and right away, they underwent persecution by the Roman government via the Uncle Tom high priest that was handpicked by the Romans to be the Jewish high priest, to overlook what was going on amongst the Jews and to take notes and snitch on any subversive activities that may have been going on. On this same time, at this same time, while the 12 disciples, known as the Way, they were not known as Christians. Israel doctrine is full of shit. And anyone who says that the first 12 disciples that were on the ground floor and the other disciples, the women, those that knew Jesus, if anybody says that they were called Christians, there's a motherfucking lie. And they can't find one scripture to suggest that the immediate followers of Jesus were called Christians. Not only that, boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, the Bible gives us 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in which there is an ample opportunity for someone to have written down the word Christian or Christianity. And guess what? None of the 4 Gospels use the word Christian or Christianity. They don't. The writer of Acts is the same writer of Luke, because the book of Acts and the book of Luke used to be one book. And the writer of Acts, which is the writer of Luke, he waits till he gets to the 11th chapter of the book of Acts before he introduces the word Christian. When he wrote the book of Luke, and he could have said Christian back then, but he didn't, because the writer of Luke and the writer of Acts, they knew that those disciples were not Christians. They weren't Christians. And so I can show you real quick. I've gone over this, but it's good to see it again. If they weren't Christians, Khalil, if they weren't Christians, what were they calling themselves? That's a legitimate question. Because struggle doctrine, he wants to continue the outright lie that the first Christians were Israelites. It is a bold-faced, unadulterated lie. And he got a serious sicko sitting next to him named Hananiah that's running the same place. You see, Miss Troutmouth, his so-called queen, who wants us to debate, forget debate, just pay attention to the knowledge. Pay attention to what Struggle Doctrine is teaching and pay attention to what I'm teaching. And if you do that, Struggle, Miss Troutmouth, if anybody does that, they'll see that I'm right and he's wrong. They were not calling themselves Christians during the lifetime of Jesus, and neither were they calling themselves Christians when Jesus ascends to heaven. Well, you ask, well, what were they calling themselves? In the book of Acts, the same author of the book of Luke, he tells us what those original people, those original 12 disciples, and the rest of the people were calling those who believed in Jesus. And it wasn't Christian. They never heard the term Christian. And they were not talking about no Christianity. And so, we just need to go to the book of Acts, and we'll find out quickly what those people were called. Starting with Acts, the 9th chapter. Let me run through it real quick. I've already shown this information. Struggle Doctrine, he don't want to deal. He don't want to deal with this. But what were the people that sat at the feet of Jesus, his original disciples, the original listeners, hearers, the original followers of Jesus? It starts out right here in Acts. We're talking about Acts chapter 9. It says, and Saul, who became Paul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against who? The disciples of the Lord. Not against the Christians, not against Christianity, but against the disciples of the Lord. Who were the disciples of the Lord? James, Peter, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas the brother of James, and Matthias, the final disciple who replaces Judas Iscariot. Those are the disciples of the Lord. Those are the disciples of the Lord. And here we have Saul, who would become the Apostle Paul. He's over there breathing out threatenings and slaughter, murder, and unaliving against the disciples of Jesus, the disciples of the Lord. And he goes to the high priest. And Saul desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, not to the churches, but to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way. You want to know what the disciples of Jesus, what the original followers of Jesus were called? They were called this way. W-A-Y. You got it? They were not called, it says, if Saul found any Christian, no. If Saul found any of those people who believed in Christianity, no. It says, if Saul found any of this way. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, well, that's just one time. Maybe that's just, I don't know, whatever. Okay, Acts, same book. Acts 19, Acts the 19th chapter. Acts the 19th chapter, verse 9. But when divers were hardened and believed not, but spake evil of that way, before the multitude he departed from them and separated the disciples. There it goes again. The operative word is way. This way and that way. That's what the disciples of Jesus, not the disciples of Paul, that's what the disciples of Jesus were being called. They were not being called Christians because the term Christian had not yet been invented or spoken. Got it? Down at verse 23. Turn the page. And the same time, there arose no small stir about that way, that way. That's the third time we see that the disciples of the Lord, the original followers of Jesus, are called that way or this way. My goodness. Acts 22. Acts 22 and 4. And Paul is saying, he's reflecting on his days as a Roman puppet. He says, and I, Paul, persecuted this way unto death. See? It doesn't say I, Paul, persecuted the Christians. It doesn't say I, Paul, persecuted Christianity. It says I, Paul, persecuted this way. That's the fourth time we see the phrase this way being used in description of the disciples of the Lord. Acts 24:22. He ain't showed, Israel doctrine ain't showed you this stuff. 24:22. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, there it is again. Having perfect knowledge of that way, having perfect knowledge of the teachings of Jesus is what he's saying. Not having perfect knowledge of Christianity, not having perfect knowledge of the Christians, but perfect knowledge of that way. Well, why does the Bible use the phrase, the term way, 5 times in the book of Acts before it even gets to that crazy word Christian? Because of this. Because John himself, John 14 and 6, because of John 14 and 6, Jesus calls himself the way. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, goddammit, the truth and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So the fact that they were called the way, they got it from their leader, from their Mashiach, from their Messiah, from their anointed one. Jesus called himself the way. Not Christian and not the father of Christianity. Am I winning or am I winning? We talking Bible, we talking scripture. How is Israel doctrine going to combat that? The book of Acts calls the disciples of the Lord the way 5 times. And they are called the way 5 times because Jesus in John 14 and 6, he says, I am the way. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I think the disciples understood just fine when Jesus was on earth and he proclaimed to the 12, hey, I'm the way. I am the way. I'm the way, I'm the truth, and I am the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. That shit stuck with them. And when Jesus descends into heaven, they began to call themselves followers of the way. Because Jesus said he was the way. Not followers of Jesus, not followers of the Christ. Because Jesus and Christ are Greek words. The man's name was never Jesus. His name was Yeshua. Some say Yeshua. And some say Yehoshua. There's so many variations. Pick one and play with it. Pick one and play with it. Some say Hawaii, Yahweh Basha, why some shit they say. Every Israelite camp, every Hebrew Israelite camp, they got a different pronunciation of God's name or Jesus' name. Pick one. But the fact of the matter is, Yahweh seems to be the most popular name amongst Israelites and Hebrew Israelites. But the fact remains, you cannot find God's name as Yahweh in any Bible dictionary or encyclopedia. You can't find the name Yahweh In Ehrman's Bible Dictionary, you can't find the name of Yahweh. In Unger's Bible Dictionary, you can't find the name Yahweh in the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. But you can find Yahweh. And so the consensus of modern scholars on the name of God is Yahweh. All these Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah, these ain't nothing but niggas, black niggas, American niggas, trying to read Hebrew and trying to rearrange the U and the A and the consonants and the vowels and go back to archaic Hebrew. These niggas are just guessing. The consensus of modern scholarship is that the Hebrew name for God is Yahweh, derived from the tetragrammaton, which are the four-letter words YHWH that make up that name. But the European Jews today, because the name has been buried and hidden and the pronunciation has been lost, they don't even use Yahweh. They use the name Hashem, Hashem, Hashem. In Hebrew, it simply means the name, the unspoken name. Facts upon facts. The next time somebody comes up to you and want to call God Yahuwah, Yahweh, or Yahweh, tell them to show it to you in any mainstream biblical dictionary or encyclopedia. And they would be hobbit, 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 hobbit. They would go all around the mulberry bush to explain why they say Yahuwah or Yahweh or Yahweh. Because they won't find it in any goddamn Bible, encyclopedia, or dictionary. I'm giving you what the modern consensus is. It's Yahweh. Shout out to Yahweh ben Yahweh. But here we are. Now we know. Now you know. I've shown you 6 scriptures that use the word way. 5 of them use the word way and are referring to the disciples of Jesus. Which also proves that the disciples of Jesus, they were not into Jesus worship. They were not into Jesus deification. That's Paul's thing. The ideal of Christ and Jesus and all that, that's Paul's thing. So here we have 5 scriptures throughout the book of Acts that refer to the first followers of Jesus as being called the way. How is Israel doctrine going to respond to that? How is Israel doctrine going to fight against what the Bible says that they were called? How's it going to do it? How and why does Israel doctrine want to continue the lie that the first Christians were Israelites? Do you see the word Christian in this pertaining to the first Jesus believers? No, you don't. That's why I say the first Christians were Gentiles. Because the first Jesus believers did not use such a foreign term. Oh yeah. Not to mention, we've already talked about the fact that the very word Christian is of pagan origin. That the word Christian was a word created by Roman pagans. That it was a word that was derogatory and negative and placed on the backs of Paul's followers. Not Jesus' followers, Paul's followers. We're going to get to that. But look at what Paul or should I say Saul, is doing. When Paul comes on the scene, his name was Saul. He ain't got shit to do with the teachings of Jesus. Although he was quite aware of Jesus, he was so much aware of Jesus that he sought employment as a satrap, lackey, puppet, stooge, stoolie, Roman dog. That was his occupation. His occupation was working for Rome via the high priest to round up people of the way. Not Christians, people of the way. Not Christianity, but people of the way. Authentic and real Jesus followers. That's what he was doing. And he was not just rounding them up. He was beating up the people of the way. He was raping boys and girls and women of the way. He was sodomizing men and women of the way. He was punching them and kicking them and stabbing them and spitting on them. He was having his way. No pun intended. I said Saul was having his way with the people of the way. Don't let the book sanitize it for you. I know the Bible has to make things pristine and smooth it over, nice and harmonized, and but when you ain't got no rule of law, you better believe that when Saul would find these men and women who were of the way, who believed in Jesus, you better believe when he saw some of these pretty little women, pretty young girls, and married women that were gorgeous beyond all get out, you better believe they were taking them women and them young girls and raping them, and then putting them in chains and putting them in the back of the paddy wagon. You better believe among Paul's men, it wasn't just Saul, it was Saul and a whole garrison, a whole army of men he had at his disposal. You better believe Saul would say, that one over there, bring that bitch over here to my tent. That little 12-year-old girl, bring her to my tent. You better believe some of Saul's men were homosexuals, and they were like, see that young boy there? Ooh, I'm going to blow that little boy's back out. Can I have him? You can have him. Take him to your tent. The Bible is about sanitization. I'm about the real ism. It wasn't just that Saul was rounding up the people of the way and putting them in chains and putting them in a paddy wagon and bringing them back. He had his way with the way. I'm going to write a book about this shit one day. It's going to be real gory and in your face. But that's what Saul was doing. This is the motherfucker that people like Israel Doctrine and the whole Christian world and the whole Hebrew Israelite world, they prop up this motherfucker. A murderer, a rapist, an imprisoner, a bully, an Uncle Tom, a Benedict Arnold. Paul wasn't shit when he was Saul. Don't worry, I got a whole series exclusively to him. But what you need to know, this is what Saul, who became Paul, was doing after Jesus would ascend to heaven. And the writer of Acts and the writer of Luke, someone who they say was named Luke, the physician, he got it right when he talked about the direct disciples of Jesus. He got it right when he called them the way and not Christians, which makes struggle doctrine and the bullshit he teaching straight lies. The first Jesus believers were Israelites. The first Christians were Gentiles. He can't make that distinction. If you can't show me in the first 4 Gospels where Jesus actually speaks, if you can't put the word Christian in Jesus' mouth, why would you say that his followers are called Christians? If you can't show me a scripture where Jesus says, I'm starting a new religion and it's going to be called Christianity, why would you call yourself a part of the movement known as Christianity? I'm going where struggle doctrine can never go, because he only has one major source, and that's just the Bible. But even the Bible backs up everything I'm saying. You can't find Christian or Christianity in the first 4 Gospels. The word Christian is only used 3 times, and Christianity is only used once, later on in the New Testament. But notice that the disciples are called the way, and they're also called of the Lord. The disciples of the Lord. The writer of the book of Acts and the writer of the book of Luke and the 4 Gospels, they got plenty and apt time to create the phrase Christian, but they don't. They don't mention the word Christian during the life of Jesus, and they don't mention it when they talk about the original followers of Jesus. They call them the disciples of the Lord, the brethren, and the way. Even Eisenman said it in his book. Eisenman says it. Eisenman says it. Let me see if I can find it again. Even he says it. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. I had it marked. Maybe I can't find it, but I had it, but I lost it. Well, it don't matter. We read it earlier. Rewind the tape, you'll see where I read it. Oh, here it is. Here it is. There it is. Even Eisenman backs up what I just said. See, Eisenman, Professor Eisenman from California State University at Long Beach. He says, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, Saul might bring them back bound to Jerusalem. The way, not the Christian, not Christianity, but the way. The way, of course, was a frequently used. That means they use it a lot. Frequently means they used it a lot. The way was a frequently used term in the Qumran literature to describe the community, the Jesus people. Okay, all right. Enough of that. Now, so now what happens next? We know that Saul has a religious conversion. He has a religious experience. He goes from murderer, he goes from jailer. He goes from imprisoner. He goes from rapist. He goes from pedophile. He goes from, beating up people and stabbing people, raping and unaliving people. He goes from all of that. And on the way to Damascus to do the same things, he says he has a religious experience. Acts chapter 9. On the road to Damascus, he has a change of heart. He believes that he has a vision from Jesus in the sky. Some scholars say that nigga was hallucinating because it was hot as fuck out there. And his conscience was fucking with him because he was, as he says, a Hebrew, an Israelite, and a Pharisee. Some scholars believe that his whole upbringing started fucking with him to the point where he's like, why am I doing this to my own people? So he switches sides and he calls it a religious conversion, but it is really his conscience going, goddamn, I was raised as a Jew. I studied at the school of Pharisee. The fuck is wrong with me? I know the great teacher Shammah and Hillel, and my own teacher, I can't think of his name right now. I was brought up in the Pharisaic way. I was brought up as an Israelite. I was brought up as a Hebrew. What the fuck am I doing as he traveled in the hot sun to Damascus? And he claimed that he had a vision. He gave it to someone named Jesus in the sky. Again, some scholars, some psychologists believe that, no, this nigga just, his conscience got the best of him. But we're not going to debate that. But he has this experience, and he becomes a Jesus follower. Now let me ask you all this. If you were the one that was raping people and murdering people and putting people in prison and beating the fuck out of people, your own people, by the way, your own DNA, your own bloodline, and you had to change your heart because you claim you saw the Son of God, what would you do right after conversion? What would you do right after you realize you were wrong and you realize that you are persecuting those of the way? What would you do? What would be your first course of action? You now believe in Jesus. I'm asking you. I'm not going to ask Struggle Doctrine because he's in La La Land. I'm asking you. You now know that Jesus is real and Jesus has a message for you. What would be the first thing you would do? I'll tell you. Logically speaking, Paul should have made a beeline. Stat, ASAP, straightway, B times. Paul should have made his ass do an about face and went to Jerusalem to seek forgiveness from the Jerusalem church and to express that he is now one of them. Does that seem, like logical thing to do? Go back to Jerusalem because Paul was quite aware of the Jerusalem church. I just told you all, he was a hireling and a sycophant of the Roman church to round up those of the way. He knew exactly who they were. He knew who was the HNIC in Jerusalem. He knew who the head nigga in charge was. James, the brother of Jesus. He knew all the head honchos. For Saul had reconnaissance. He had a notebook. He knew exactly who was who. And now he believes in Jesus. Wouldn't you think, logically speaking, that he would do an about face and make his way back to Jerusalem? Not only to ask for forgiveness, not only to apologize, not only to become one with the Jerusalem church, but to learn firsthand of this man, Jesus, that he saw in a vision on the road to Damascus. Wouldn't you think that he would want to sit at the feet of the people that knew the man when he walked on earth? Of course, that's logical. Oh shit, let me get my ass to Jerusalem. Let me go sit at the feet of James and Peter and John. Let me go hear their wisdom and their words, and let me hear their theocracy, their theology. Let me hear what they say about eschatology and the parousia, the second coming. Let me hear and learn from those that Jesus actually taught. What does Paul do? Changes his name from Saul to Paul. Would you believe this nigga doesn't do that? Would you believe that he don't give a fuck about what they got going on in Jerusalem? Would you believe that would be 3 years before he would have a conversation with one of the heads of the Jerusalem church, Brother Peter? How is that? The original members of the Way are alive in Jerusalem. He becomes a believer in what they believe, so he says. And he doesn't feel any inclination to go and sit at their feet and get some first-hand stories and knowledge about that man called Jesus. The first 3 years, he don't even fuck the niggas in Jerusalem. I'm going to be my own leader. He don't go ask him for no advice. He don't go ask him for the details of the Jesus teaching. He don't ask the Jerusalem church for shit. He goes his way. We are told that his mission by God or Jesus or whatever is to the Gentiles. Well, how convenient that this guy, Paul, doesn't want to go and talk to other Jews, other Israelites, and other Hebrews. How convenient it is that he wants to be a leader, he wants to be a religious leader, but how convenient that his mission is to some other motherfuckers that he don't even know. How convenient. Of course he goes to the Gentiles. Why does he go to the Gentiles? Because the Jews don't trust him. Why does he become the apostle to the Gentiles? Because he did so much fuck shit. He murdered and raped and molested and imprisoned so many Israelites. How in the fuck is he ever going to go and preach to them now? Of course, he got to go somewhere else. Because he doesn't want to be a student of the students. He doesn't want to sit at the feet of James, Peter, and John. He doesn't want to seek forgiveness from the disciples in Jerusalem and from the Jewish community at large. Because he's such a narcissist and an egotistical megalomaniac in search of power and control and to be a leader and to be a man among men. He concocts this, I'm going to the Gentiles. He's smart enough to know. He's smart enough to know that the Israelites and the Jews and the Hebrews will never fuck with him again. He's smart enough to know that. And so from the time he becomes a convert into Jesus, he doesn't go and find and learn from the people that sat and knew Jesus personally. He don't want to fuck with them. And it takes him three years before he interacts with one of the Jerusalem church, Peter. And from that 3 years, it would be another, he spent 10 days. I could be wrong. He spent some days with Peter. And after that, it would be 14 years later before he would actually have a sit down with the immediate 12 disciples of Jesus. Tell me that's not super weird. First, it's 3 years before he talks to one of them, Peter. And then 14 years after that before he talks to James, Peter, John, and the rest of the Jerusalem church. You know he got it wrong. If you don't go to the source, it's a foregone conclusion that whatever the fuck you're teaching is not going to be accurate. And it wasn't accurate. Thus, the struggle begins. Because Saul or Paul doesn't want to take direction. He didn't wore out his welcome amongst the Hebrews, the Jews, and the Israelites. He wore that shit out. You know how bad he wore it out? When Peter takes him to Jerusalem, 3 years after the bitch nigga becomes a Jesus believer, you know what kind of reception he got from the leaders in Jerusalem? They were afraid of the nigga. They didn't want no parts of him. Even though the bitch nigga Paul converted to their leader's belief, Jesus, they didn't want shit to do with that man. Let me give it to you. I said they were batshit afraid of him. I'm explaining it to you. They were afraid of him. Acts 9. This is what struggle doctrine can't do. He don't give you the real ism, the real dilly. He only talking about, I don't see no problem between Paul and Peter and them. I don't see no problem. Nigga, you're not reading. I said Acts the 9th chapter. Check this out. Check this out. Saul escapes to Jerusalem. And after that, many days were fulfilled that the Jews, the Israelites, the Hebrews, took counsel to kill Paul or Saul. Why? Because he was raping and murdering and imprisoning the Jews. But their laying await was known of Saul, and they watched the gates day and night to kill him. Then the disciples took him by night and let him down. See, they're in Damascus. Let him down a wall in a basket. And when Saul was come to Jerusalem, he essayed to join himself to the disciples, But they were all afraid of him and believed not that he was a disciple. Goddamn. See the word assayed? See that little T there? It tells you assayed means tried. Verse 26. Verse 26. T assayed. It means he tried. So Saul, he goes to Jerusalem. Mind you, this is 3 years later. And he essayed, he tried to join himself to the disciples, to James and Peter and John and Andrew and Philip and Thomas and Bartholomew and Matthew, all of them. But all 12 and the rest of the multitude, all of the disciples, they were afraid of him and believed not that he was a disciple. Let's talk about that. What is this nigga over here talking? What is the struggle, Dino? I don't see no rift. I don't see no problem with Paul and Peter and James and them. I don't see it. Because the nigga's not reading. And so Paul becomes Saul, but he's still Saul right here. And the Jews in Damascus, they sought to murder that motherfucker because he was torturing and raping and imprisoning Israelite people. They had his number. And then you had some flunkies that said, oh, we're going to let you escape. Get in the basket. We're going to lower you down. And Acts chapter 9 tells us Saul goes back. He goes to Jerusalem. Why does he go to Jerusalem? Why does he go to Jerusalem? He goes there to attach himself and become part of the Jerusalem church. This is his one attempt. His one attempt to become a part of the Jerusalem church. Had the disciples of the Lord, had those of the way accepted him, we might not have any of this Paul writing bullshit. Had they accepted him and he became an underling of the Jerusalem church, we might not have Corinthians. We wouldn't have Corinthians and the 7 authentic books of Paul. We wouldn't have the 21 books and letters of Paul if the Jerusalem church had accepted him. If Paul accepted his role as a second tier Jesus believer, as a student of the students of Jesus, we wouldn't have nothing about Paul today. We wouldn't even know Paul. We wouldn't know nothing about his story. But the Jerusalem church, being afraid, out of fear of who this man, as they thought, was and is, hell no, don't bring that motherfucker around us. This motherfucker raped my mama. This motherfucker and his people, they molested my nephew. This motherfucker and his band of merry men, they raped and tortured my nieces. This motherfucker, Saul, he murdered my uncle and raped his wife. This motherfucker put chains of fetter and iron around many of our kinfolks' legs and wrists, shackles, and put them in a paddy wagon and took them back to Jerusalem to be murdered and imprisoned. Hell no. Don't bring that bitch nigga around us. Shit, we're afraid. For all we know, he's faking that he believes in Jesus just to infiltrate our church. See, struggle doctrine, he don't have the insights that I have. The Bible tells you right there. It tells you that he tried to join himself to the disciples in Jerusalem, but they were all afraid of him and believed not that he was a disciple. See, James and Peter and John, those original disciples, they thought the nigga was playing possum. They thought he was just trying to get in to fit in, or to fit in to get in. They thought he was a goddamn FBI, CIA, covert spy. They thought that Saul just wanted to get close to the leadership and to the money, the banking, the financial stuff, and was going to destroy the Jerusalem church from within. This is the shit that the Bible doesn't tell you. You got to read and understand the historicity of the times. Something that old Israel doctrine, he hasn't even thought about these things. He hasn't even thought, well, why does James, Peter, John, and the rest of them, are they afraid of Saul? And why do they not believe that he believes in Jesus? Because Saul had a track record of imprisoning people, of murdering people, of raping people, of sodomizing people, of stabbing people, of beating people up, throwing rocks at people, spitting on people. He had a whole history. I mean, look at some of you niggas. Some of you niggas look at me, a former government informant, and you will not touch me with a 10-foot pole. And I did a good thing. Some of you out there watching this video, you hear the word government informant, you say snitch, rat, dog. Some of you hear that I was a government informant for the FBI, and you wouldn't be my friend. You wouldn't trust me as far as you can throw me. And I ain't murdered nobody. I ain't raped nobody. I ain't put nobody in prison. But you would hold me at arm's length for my association with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But then you're a Christian. You're a Hebrew Israelite. You're an Israelite. And you fully embraced this motherfucker right here, Saul. And he did 1,000 times worse than I ever could imagine doing to my own people. But you embrace him. He get a pass. He get a pass because he claims that he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus. Was it 1 minute 14? I cannot. Oh. That's weird as fuck. What is going on with that? Oh, I see what it is. My head back there was in the way and it was messing up with my numbers. Hour and 14 minutes. Oh. Paul comes down in history. He gets a whole pass. People like Israel Doctrine, they lick his balls. They lick the dingleberries out of his booty hole. All the bad shit that Paul does. Because it's not spelled out and written, these niggas can't use their imagination and realize what kind of shit must have been going on. It wasn't no rule of law back in those days. You see a woman, you want her, you take her. Paul was doing more than just putting people in prison. That nigga had a whole Napoleonic complex. History says that nigga was ugly as fuck, He had a unibrow, a crooked nose, and crooked legs. And he was like 4'7" in height. That's what history says about him. You know he wasn't getting no pussy on his looks. He was taking pussy by force. We got a long way to go. But what we've learned in this part right here, part 3, is that they weren't called no goddamn Christians. They were called the Way, based on 5 scriptures in Acts. And we have John 14:6, where Jesus himself said he was the way. What we've learned thus far is that Saul, he tried to weasel his way into the Jesus movement. And Acts 9:26 says that they were afraid of that nigga, and they didn't believe that he was a changed man. So what the fuck do you think Paul was going to do after that? After they gave that nigga the Heisman. They gave that nigga the talk to the hand. What you think he going to do now? Now the nigga is in his fifis. Now the nigga has got his emotions. Oh, they don't want to let me join on with them. They don't believe that I've changed. They don't want to forgive me for all my murders and rapes and beating up my own people. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm gonna teach Jesus my way. I'm gonna teach him my own way. I'm gonna teach it my own way. This is what he did. Oh, how these Hebrew Israelites and Christians and Israelites, oh, how they just sanitize this shit. Oh, how these niggas like Israel Doctrine, they do not and will not take into account the people's feelings and emotions about what Saul had done to them. My goodness. My goodness. He comes along and tells some story about a conversion. And he expects that the Jewish people are supposed to just embrace his story and his change of heart and receive him. He knew better. He knew better. But look at us today. We do not for a moment have any compassion for the Jews, for the Hebrews, for the Israelite people, and what Saul had done to them. We don't have no compassion. We've looked the other way about what he's done to his own people. That wasn't bad enough.
I'm gone.
Okay. Have a good day. Yeah. Thank you. I'm just about done anyway. We have no compassion for the Jewish people and what they had to endure under the reign of Saul. And today, we uphold Saul simply on his word that he claims he had a conversion. See, you believe today what the Jerusalem church did not believe. And that is that Paul had changed. James, Peter, John, and the Jerusalem church, they did not believe that Saul became Paul and he became a Jesus believer. But you believe it. You believe it because you are 2,000 years removed from the shit situation. James, Peter, John, Andrew, Thomas, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, and the rest of them. They were in the shit with the man. Hell no, no way were they going to say, okay, we forgive you. They saw the havoc that Saul would wreak on the nation of Israel. They were afraid of the man, and they didn't believe that he had converted. How about that? How about that? You don't get that in church. Acts 9:26 says they were afraid of Saul and they did not believe that he became a Jesus follower. Wow. They had more sense than struggle doctrine and a lot of you all who cite and quote Paul like he's somebody special. With that, y'all, I got to go. We'll see you back for part 4. Peace.